1970s were such a time of hope and excitement in the church, weren't they? The Second Vatican Council had spoken of the apostolate of lay people, our role and mission in the church. We were called a priestly people. The council spoke of the baptismal priesthood, which we live out in our daily lives. It was a huge shift for the people of God. I was reminded of that feeling of hope recently when I heard that Sister Janet Mead, who is known for her pop rock version of the Our Father, died this year. In those days of the 70s, there was so much energy in the church, so many young people and people of all ages involved. Where did that feeling go? I think it's still there, but it's been more hidden in recent years because of various scandals and problems. Canada's residential schools, clergy sexual abuse, financial mismanagement. But even so, today's engaged lay Catholic is ready to take on a more active role in the church. As the number of active priests decreases, the moment is ripe for lay leadership. What does this mean in practical terms? I've been thinking about that for a while. And since I'm a book editor, I thought that a book might be a good way to tackle this topic. So I invited a number of Novalis authors, men, women, lay, ordained, to contribute a chapter each on various themes. So the themes in the book are liturgy, Catholic education, women, sacramental preparation and religious education, social justice, the environment, science and religion, and moral theology and bioethics. I also invited a bishop, Paul-André Durocher of the Archdiocese of Gatineau, and a theologian, Professor Catherine Clifford of St. Paul University, to reflect on what the contributors had to say. Their afterword sums up beautifully the frustrations, challenges, and opportunities for lay people in the church. So that's where the book came from. The contributors surpassed my expectations. They were all so honest, while at the same time speaking as engaged laity and clergy who see many possibilities for lay involvement. They all love the church and speak from a place of faith. It's an inspiring read, especially if you find yourself feeling a little cynical about whether lay people really have a place in the church. In 2013, in Evangelii Gaudium, Pope Francis spoke of the role of the laity, and it's worth reading if you have some time. It's available online. Here are a couple of quotes from paragraphs 102 and 103. Lay people are, put simply, the vast majority of the people of God. The minority, ordained ministers, are at their service. There has been a growing awareness of the identity and mission of the laity in the church. A clear awareness of this responsibility of the laity, grounded in their baptism and confirmation, does not appear in the same way in all places. I call that an understatement. In some cases, it is because laypersons have not been given the formation needed to take on important responsibilities. In others, it is because in their particular churches, room has not been made for them to speak and to act due to an excessive clericalism, which keeps them away from decision-making. And then we need to create still broader opportunities for a more incisive female presence in the church. Catherine Mulroney and Christine Way-Skinner are two of the contributors to Looking to the Laity. They both have great insights and perspectives on lay ministry, and I know you'll get a lot out of their presentations today. Ministry is a broad term, and there are many different kinds. We decided to focus the conversation today on women in ministry today. What is, right now, both formal ministry and everyday ministry, such as visiting the sick and being the primary faith educators of children. Christine will start us off. So over to you, Christine.
Okay, great. So when I was, so first of all, I'm not going to talk about what I wrote in the book, which is what it looks like here. If you want to learn about what laity can contribute to religious education in sacramental prep, you're going to have to read the book. I'm only going to focus on women in ministry. So when I was asked to speak about what women contribute to ministry, I immediately said yes. And then I thought, oh no, what have I done? I have no idea how to answer this question. I know what many of the women whom I have witnessed work in ministry have brought to my life. And I think back to the Sisters of Notre Dame, the CNDs, and the Sisters of Providence, who taught me in my elementary and high school days. They were smart, insightful, wise, prayerful, funny, inspiring. They all made me want to be like them. Was it because they were women? I don't know, but they certainly helped me see what was possible for women. Then there was the Sisters of St. Martha, with whom I lived when I was in university. They were kind and welcoming. They understood hospitality. They were faith-filled, inspirational people who taught me how to live in community in a healthy, joyful, prayerful way. And they also had the very best parties. There were also the women that I have worked with who are lay ecclesial ministers, professional women working in ministry. Here I have found a desperate love for the church, pastoral warmth, concern, compassion, intelligence, wisdom. I have found a lot of collaboration. We are always trying to connect with each other, learn from one another, share insights and techniques. We don't hoard our information, and if we find something works, we want to tell everybody so that they can do this, what works, and all of our programs can be better. I found that that's the way that we work together. I have found within that community great support during times of struggle. There was always someone to call if you needed to cry or rage or celebrate. There was always someone there who wanted to share those emotional times with you. And finally, there's the women who engage in the regular ministry of the laity in parish. The bulk of the volunteers that I worked with in all of my years of ministry were women. There were obviously males as well, but there were mostly females volunteering. And in particular, I have to say that the most formidable, dedicated, wise, community building people in the church are the Catholic Women's League. They have to get special mention because they really hold up so many of our parishes. So I have watched women bring organizational skills, a deep sense of service, patience, compassion at every level of pastoral life, where they were included. Anywhere that they were included or invited to serve, that's what I saw them bring. But which of these gifts come from them being specifically female, I really can't tell. I also know what I bring to ministry, or what I perceive that I bring to ministry. I have a very type A personality with all its resultant gifts and, well, challenges. Ask me to organize a parish program down to the last detail, bring it on. There's no doubt this comes from my mother, so is that a feminine trait? Not sure. I'm a creative problem solver, I think, which I clearly got from my father, who once made a barbecue spit for a pig roast out of a clothes dryer that he picked up at the dump. I'm an off-the-scale extrovert, so welcoming is in my DNA. It comes from both my parents. I don't know if it's because I'm a woman or because I'm an extrovert. I was raised on a farm with 3 other sisters, no brothers. We all learned to drive a tractor, and in my case, a bulldozer. We learned to wire the house for electricity and bring in the hay and shovel manure. Did that nourish, enhance, or diminish my femininity? I don't know, but it's part of what I bring as a skill set to ministry. I'm married, and as you heard, my husband and I have parented through adoption, raising bits and pieces of 6 children over many years, and I'm pretty sure this has been the training ground for my understanding of the complexities of family life, and it has served me in pastoral ministry. I am very nurturing in some ways, and I'm pretty suck it up buttercup in other ways. So I'm not entirely sure where that comes from, but both have been valuable attributes in ministry. When I experienced a family who really needed accommodation because they couldn't keep their heads above the water, I knew I could empathize and accommodate and accept. But when I experienced a family who was just trying to get away with the bare minimum, I could say, yes, I get it. I also work full time and have 5 children at home, and I'm bringing them all to church every Sunday, and hockey and dance. I think you have this. I think you can get them to the program. I range from being a peacemaker to a conflict avoider. That comes from my dad. I'm argumentative. I like to be right. That comes from my mom. So ultimately, when I look at my gifts and my accompanying weaknesses, I cannot really tell which of them come from me being specifically female and which are my being specifically Christine. So how do I answer the question? What do women bring to ministry? In light of Pope Francis's invitation for us to build a church of synodality, a church in which we walk together along the same path, sharing our wisdom and our insights about our faith, I decided to take a synodal approach. So about a week and a half ago, I went to my email address book and sent out an email to a whole lot of people. People from high school, people from, my school in the US, just people everywhere. And I told them about this presentation, and I asked them how they would answer the question. Perhaps a few people will respond. Over 100 people responded. It took me 4 hours to read all of the emails, and I have 33 pages of notes. These people were people who are in the church, who fight fiercely for the church, who love the church as it is, who are not happy with who the church is right now, people who identify in the left, in the right, men, women. I had 19-year-old males respond to my email, and a 91-year-old woman who works in the nursing home that I work in. Priests, religious, and lay ecclesial ministers, and the laity of all facets were involved in this conversation. Now, some people were triggered by the question, and this came from both sides of the theological spectrum. One person outright said, I dislike this kind of question. Everyone, both men and women, has unique gifts from God that can be used in ministry. It makes me think about people wanting power, when really at ministry, everything should always be there. Everyone should always be there to serve. I'm going to use direct quotes. When I do this, it means I'm quoting somebody because I hate hearing the word quote. A therapist in our parish wrote, "A good and loving heart has no gender. There seems to be more differences within gender than between genders when it comes to being a true Christian and serving." Many people said that people should just serve according to their gifts, regardless of what gender that form takes. At least 4 people questioned the very notion of gender as a category for rating or understanding ministerial gifts. And one young woman, who I think is here today actually, said, "When I tell my friends outside the church that we are asking this question, they're baffled. Aren't we past asking questions about gender this way?" This same thought was expressed by women my age as well. But in the answers, these are some of the things that people said that they really do feel women bring. One person said, "I think women bring empathy and compassion into the various ministries of the church. It's never cut and dry, as it often is with men, but rather emotions are always at the forefront. As nurturers, women have a deep understanding of suffering and are therefore better able to relate." Another person said, "Women have a way of viewing the world different from men and often understand things that men do not. Most women lead with their heart, men with their head." Many people talked about women's strength. One person said, they know too often what it is to give every ounce of energy and support in their own family, and they do the same in the church. Another person said, "If we look at our Blessed Mother, that would be what a real woman is. 50 years old, going to the crucifixion, a tenacious, strong woman who goes on to climb the high hills in Ephesus. She's a physical and emotional powerhouse." Many people talked about connection and relationality. Women have gifts for connection and relationality, which are essential for ministry. The simple fact is that many people want to speak to a woman. Having a woman represent mothers was important to people, especially when it came to issues around sexuality, issues around abuse. I had a lawyer write the most incredibly moving account of working with victims of abuse and their experience, not just in the Catholic Church, but in churches, and really needing a woman to speak to. I had a high school teacher talk about young women dealing with abusive sexuality. And a founding member of the Rose of Sharon talk about how important it was to have women dealing with young teen pregnancies. Somebody wrote, women bring a quiet strength, a willingness to listen, a commitment to serve, a desire to help others. Another person wrote that when I think of women, I think of unity. We all belong, sensitivity, a sense of balance. A 19-year-old male said, sometimes you just got to talk to a girl. Guys don't get it. Many people talked about how women are the ones who pass on the faith. And some people said that we don't have credibility if we don't have both men and women involved in ministry. A number of people, especially parents of girls, talked about how important it was to have girls see themselves reflected in the ministers who cared for them. One person said, off the top of my head, I'd say women expand the reach of ministry. When you dive down into the nitty-gritty of the faith, it sure helps if you're hearing it and getting it from someone you can relate to. She talks about a few people who stepped away from their faith and didn't feel welcomed or validated. And she said, every time a woman hears a message like that, it's like adding another brick to the nice solid wall that she's building between God and herself. And finally, one person said, besides everything, because of who and what we are, I think women can bring the perspective of those who have been overlooked and underestimated. So what did I learn? These are all people's experiences. So they're all what people actually experienced from women in ministry. So we know that women bring an incredible wealth to both professional lay ministry and ordinary parish lay ministry. As one person said, I think there are very many gifts, a great wealth of insight, experience, and wisdom offered by women in ministry. A better question is, what don't women bring? Do all women bring all these gifts? Of course not. Do men also bring these gifts? Absolutely. Does the culture in which we live affect how we bring these gifts? Certainly. I've come to believe that women do bring a different constellation of gifts than simply the gifts that men bring. It's not better, not worse, but in my experience, it is something different. And that seems to be reflected in my little synodal group of 100 and some people. Is it different because of our biology or our socialization? I cannot say, but I suspect both contribute in some way. And I suspect this will be a fluid thing, that as our cultures change, that we will find that our gifts and those things that are called out from us change. And also the conversations that we have about gender are going to change some of how we perceive this. Most of all, what I learned in all of my consultation with my many wise friends and colleagues is that the church needs these gifts of women in ministerial settings at every level, from pastoral councils to pastoral teams, from the local parish all the way up to the Vatican. Most of all, what I've learned is that the church is supremely impoverished when it does not receive these God-given gifts and cherish them to the degree that they ought to be cherished. That's my offering. And it's actually many people's offering.
Thank you so much, Christine. Wow. That could be a book in itself, I think.
There you go, Anne Louise. More work for you.
I think we should talk about that later. It's true. It's such a, I was thinking of a tapestry or a quilt or something that so much love and energy is poured into. And yeah, that's just beautiful. And to hear that from so many different voices too is quite rich. Okay, so let's move to Catherine Mulroney. So Catherine. I think you're muted though.
as always. Let me begin by thanking you for inviting me today. I'd love to talk about the church. I'm fascinated by the church. I can be a critic of the church, as can my cat. But at the end of the day, I remain. I remain for my children. I remain for me. And I remain hopeful. And I hope helpful. If I think about women in ministry, I think first and foremost about my mother and about the nuns who taught me. My formative years began after the council, and I watched my mother gradually move into positions like elector and eventually parish council president. And she did it in a very kind of madman way, where she was subservient and answerable, and yes, father, no father. But still, it was groundbreaking to see a woman up at the altar, for example. So in my mind, always as a young Catholic growing up, was, I wonder what kind of ministry I will engage in. And as it happened, my first experience came organically, and it came from being a mother. Because in those days, I walked my kids back and forth to school 3 times a day. And it was June and it was hot. And they had many lectures at school about the need to stay hydrated, to have sunscreen, all those sorts of safety things. And there was a man lying on a bench on Yonge Street around the corner from our house. And every time we passed, the kids would say, but Mom, he doesn't have anything to drink. He doesn't have a hat. He doesn't have sunscreen. So on each of our trips back and forth to school, we would find something else to leave on his bench. And at the end of the day, he was gone, and so were all the articles. And this made a huge impression on my children. So we began cooking for our local Out of the Cold program. And the kids helped, and it was a wonderful experience for our family, and we felt like we were dipping our toe into ministry. A couple of years later, I found myself running that program with a male counterpart. And inevitably, program responsibilities broke down along traditional gender lines. He would handle the finances. I would be in the kitchen. I would be dealing with conversations, particularly with the women guests, about things like, could they have a shower? Did we have any feminine hygiene products? Could their mat be placed far enough away from the men because they were afraid, or they were shy, whatever. And it soon became clear that there were things women wanted to speak to other women about. And I began to realize it's not a question of I'm more compassionate or I'm a better listener. It's that I'm more likely to have had that experience. So then my mother died, and her death was a faith-filled moment for me. And I realized I was going to go back to school and explore what I had just been through. And I moved into an MDiv program, which has a field component. And I was asked to run the RCIA program in my parish. And I said yes, assuming it was a 1-year commitment. I'd get it done, get the mark, get out the door. I had not anticipated that I was going to fall in love with this program. And I did it for 10 years. And there were many, many instances where me being a woman simply made a difference. Every year, for example, we would bring in the inquirers, the pastor and I, to sit down and get a sense of where they were on their journey, what they were looking for, what they knew about the church. And one year, a young woman came in, she was about 40. And also in the group was our newly minted, newly ordained, very sweet, very naive associate pastor. And the inquirer began to talk about her recent trip to Italy. Her husband was baptized. She and her 2 children were not baptized, but they still kind of considered themselves all as Catholics. And they were going to look at the churches. They were going to go to the Vatican. And this inquirer fell in love with Italian art, Renaissance art. She was inspired. She wanted to learn more. But the entire trip, she felt kind of funny. She thought something was up. And so on the plane on the way home, she found herself in prayer. She was not a prayerful person, but she found herself in prayer because she was worried that something was wrong, that she was ill. And in fact, when she came home, she saw her doctor and was quickly diagnosed with aggressive ovarian cancer. And she started to cry. She said, I have 2 small children and a husband. And at that point, she pivoted to me because the pastor had on a ministerial face that was just blank. And the new associate was quite visibly uncomfortable because he likely had never encountered this before and hadn't had enough pastoral experience yet to be present for the woman and put his feelings aside. So she turned to me and we had a conversation and we worked out how she was going to go forward. And at the vigil, she and her children were baptized and received their sacraments. And it was a beautiful process. But I realized it was probably made easier because there were times when she had physical issues that she had to deal with that she had me to speak to. And another time, I can think of a young woman I knew who had joined an RCIA program in her late teens. She had recently had an abortion and she was feeling remorse. And she had found her way to a post-abortion support group that included a retreat. And she was encouraged to join the church. She had been baptized, but her family had never practiced. This group told her it would be a good idea to go on this journey. So she would say, well, I like this group, but they keep saying I'll have to go to confession when I go to this retreat. And I would say, no one can tell you to go to confession. You cannot be mandated into the sacrament of reconciliation. Let's talk about it more. Let's talk about the kind of confessor who might make you feel most comfortable. It was clearly going to be a traumatic experience for her regardless. And then I got sick. I was away for a couple of weeks. She went to the retreat and came back and was just devastated. And she said, Catherine, I had to go to reconciliation and the priest made me feel terrible and I feel worse now. And to a degree, I suspect she would have felt there was that awkwardness that people often feel in the sacrament. And of course, I could never confer the sacrament on her. But there was an awkwardness in the innate power structure of a priest telling her yet again what she knew in her heart. And it really struck me that more time with her, talking to me or talking to a social worker or someone in formal ministry would have made a difference. Today, she's happily married, has 2 kids. She got past it. But it was a moment where I thought, oh dear, what if this has turned her off joining the church? So it really said to me, women make a difference in terms of who is doing the listening. And there's some very other, not just bodily issues, but issues like domestic abuse. Many women who have been abused by spouses and partners will feel more comfortable talking about their experience to another woman. I can think of a friend of mine who was ordained shortly after we graduated from university. And an older woman came to him and said, my husband is beating me. And the priest's response was, well, you've got 2 choices. You can leave him, or you can put a baseball bat under your pillow because he will kill you one day. Now, neither answer seemed appropriate because yes, obviously she probably had to leave. But that in and of itself was not helpful. And so someone who had connections, say, to Catholic Charities, who knew agencies who could offer assistance, who could offer shelter and counseling and career counseling, that's a helpful answer. But get out of the house is stating the obvious. And so I think there are plenty of times when we can go farther afield from the priest to lay ministers, and particularly to women lay ministers who may well have had similar experiences. For example, if you look, statistics in Canada say the majority of people living under the poverty line are women. So is a woman struggling to put a roof over her children's head and being able to feed her children going to be as comfortable talking to a priest who has a house, who has food on the table, or to a woman who can relate? And that's not to say that in every instance of ministry, we have to be a cookie cutter of the person to whom we minister. That would be confining, and that would be contrary to the very nature of ministry and a spiritual understanding. But I do think relatability is a very, very important component, because if we don't have women in lay ministry, we're shutting the door on all sorts of life experiences. Christine makes the point in her chapter in the book that in Lumen Gentium, the great constitution of Vatican II, it lays out that pastors are called to be shepherds, but they're not called to be jack of all trades. And we still often, I'll hear people say, well, why wasn't Father at coffee hour? Or why wasn't Father helping out at the book sale or this or that? No pastor has to do or can do everything in a church. A good shepherd is going to empower people to help, to fill in the gaps with their own expertise, their interests, their skills, and the way they relate to people. And women do that in unique ways. I remember once at Out of the Cold, some of the volunteers were talking about the issue of women priests. And in walked a teenager from an all-boys school who said, I know why women can't be priests. And I said, oh, why? And he said, because you're not made in the image and likeness of God. And I moved into full mother mode and said, well, you know what? I firmly believe I am made in the full image and likeness of God. Scandalized him, but gave him something to think about. Another time, one of the servers at Out of the Cold was complaining because a guest had said he didn't like his dinner. He'd had it the week before. He wanted something different. And this woman was appalled and said, can you imagine that? But this is a free meal. How dare he speak that way? And I said, mother to mother, what do you say to your own children when you hear that complaint? Do your family never tell you that? And of course, when she thought about it in that kind of perspective, her mind was changed. So when we pull from our unique experiences, especially if we're of a certain age and we have watched women gradually called to do more in the church, each of these steps, I think, is important. And as I was reading this morning in advance of this, I noticed that it was just in January of this year that Pope Francis formally installed lectors and catechists. And he referred to women's, what was it? Women's, quote, precious contribution. And I thought that rose my hackles just a little, but to think we've been doing it for so long. And it's only now that we're saying this is revisionism. The majority of churchgoers are women. We're needed. There's services that have to be answered. We love doing it. So we're here. Ask us is my basic philosophy.
Thanks so much, Catherine. I love hearing the stories because really that's what connects us so deeply, is those stories of people's lived experience. And your last comment just reminded me of a a tweet I saw recently by Massimo Fagioli, who's a church historian and theologian. And he said, the role of women in the church is not to be low-cost spare parts when men are lacking. I love that quote.
And of course, I've had these role models all my life. I was educated by nuns in the 70s when Vatican II had had more than a decade to seep in. And they would talk about inclusive language. And at the time I thought, oh, for Pete's sake, I know that mankind means me too. Why are we so concerned about that? And the older I got and the more nuanced my own life became, I realized inclusive language is a question of basic dignity and it matters. And bravo to the nuns who lobbied for it when no one wanted to hear that message.
Amen. So thanks to both of you for sharing your wisdom, your expertise, your lived experience, your challenges, your hopes. I think we all need to keep doing that, sharing that with each other, because we get strength from that. It can feel very lonely sometimes, where we think things just aren't going anywhere and we're stuck in this dynamic and nothing's shifting. But I think when we hear each other's stories, we can see that there are things happening below the surface even that can give us some hope. So I wanted to end this part of the webinar on a hopeful note by mentioning some recent developments in the church, because even though we don't think things are changing, they are. So here's some recent examples. In May 2021, this was a newspaper headline, Germany takes the synodal path. So the German bishops are already running with Francis's synodal approach. And that means they're speaking to the 50% of the population that is women. In November 2021, the French bishops invite 100 lay people to their General Assembly. That's amazing. Catholic laity in France are seeking ways to be more involved in governing the church. And then just a week ago, Pope rules any baptized lay Catholic, including women, can head Vatican departments. This will take effect on June 5th. One part of the preamble of that constitution says, the Pope, bishops, and other ordained ministers are not the only evangelizers in the church. Hello, I think we knew that. And adds that lay men and women should have roles of government and responsibility. And even in my parish synod sharing circle a week ago, when we were asked, how can we do church better? Participants all spoke of the need for lay people, and especially women, to have a greater role in the church. So I feel like everyone's starting to talk about it now. And once that door is open, or window perhaps, to echo Vatican II, you can't really close that anymore. So I think things are underway. So we'll just keep the faith and see where it leads. Yeah,
as our, if I can just interject briefly here, as our discussion continues today, there will be the opportunity for those of you listening to participate, either asking a question or if you have comments. I'd ask if you would like to contribute at some point, please use the raise hand feature in the Zoom tool that we're using, or if you don't feel like you would like to speak yourself, if you'd like to have your question or comment introduced by the moderator, you can just add that into the chat function within Zoom. So you can just send a message through chat, and we'll address it that way.
Thanks, Keith. So you may have some questions for us, but we also have some questions for you. So I'll start with our first question, and then we'll just see where things go. So don't be shy. So let's start with this one. What is your formal or informal ministry as a lay person today? And has that role grown or shrunk over the years? Does anyone want to respond to that one? maybe I'll ask Christine to get us rolling.
Yeah, and if somebody wants to jump in as our first contributor, feel free to unmute and make your response.
I have to say that if I look at my life and how I've been involved at different periods of my life, if it wasn't for when I was a little kid being invited to participate in all kinds of ways, reading at a school mass, or in high school being invited to come and be part of discernment processes. In my case, it was the CNDs, and then getting involved with some peace groups when I was in high school. All of those ways of being engaged were what ultimately fostered my vocation to professional ministry in the church. And one of the things that I think we did particularly well in our parish was find roles for young people. And it's going to take a generation to find out exactly how that worked. But when we ran programs, everybody had a job to do. Everybody had a task. It wasn't, I tried very much when I developed programming to make sure that it wasn't just sort of, I'm the teacher and you're the student. I'm the boss and you're here to, and I think at one point we had young people participating in more than 900 hours a year of volunteering for the parish, and that was kids from say about grade 7 until high school, and there's at least 2 young men who were in our catechetical programs who are now our parish musicians. Like, how awesome is that? And I mean, I don't know how much that was leadership or how much it would just would have happened anyway, because God wanted them there. But I'd like to believe it had something to do with how we fostered involvement of lay people in the parish. So I think all the little things that we do all along the way are really, really critical for future ministry.
Thank you. Catherine.
I work at the University of St. Michael's College now in communications. And when I think of me at that age, my exposure to church in ministry was doing things like boycotting grapes, walking in solidarity with the grape pickers, or writing letters to the mothers of the disappeared. There was a very active outreach component. And I was speaking with a young professor the other day who said, well, so many young people want to get involved in social justice, but they don't know where it stems from. And by far, the number of students I see on campus who are active in church are very traditional Catholics who want to attend adoration. And they are very active with the rosary. And
you're muted there suddenly, Catherine.
These are wonderful ways of prayer, but they weren't in my wheelhouse when I was 20. And certainly not the way my children have opted to worship. So I find it interesting that we have this diverging path, it seems. And where are the kids who are like my generation? Do they exist anymore in the church? How many kids are engaging who are going to pick up ministry and carry it forward? And will it happen in a secular way instead of under the church umbrella?
Yes. I'm just thinking back to when I was growing up, and I would say, I remember asking, or friends of mine as well, asking if we could be altar servers, and that was a big no. And apart from that, as kids, there wasn't really anything we were invited to do. And yet when my son was going through sacramental preparation and things like that, it was like what Christine was saying, everyone had a role to play, and it gave them a reason to show up and to feel connected. So I think we're getting better at getting kids who are at church or in programs to engage, because otherwise, it's not interesting, it's not fun, they're not going to catch the spirit of things. So I think that's been a positive shift over the years. Is it's not just teacher student, it's we're all here together in this boat, and we can all contribute. So that's been a positive shift. Christine.
I also have to say that some of the ways in which women in the church in my life kind of closed their eyes to some of our bad behavior, probably because they were moms, was really, really important. So I have to tell a silly story, but I was in the choir and we sat in the choir loft. And I think everybody wanted to be a part of the choir because you were in the choir loft. No one really paid attention. You could talk all through Mass, even as long as you didn't make too much noise. And in fact, what we used to do was take the Living with Christ, don't tell Novalis, and turn it into and rip little pieces and make little tiny balls and throw them on the old lady's hair. I mean, that was terrible behavior in church. And my aunt tells the story of me misbehaving in church and kind of going back to my mom afterwards and saying, Aunt Rosemarie was terrible in church today. But those women kind of knew not to be too hard on us as kids, so that church wouldn't be this place of oppression. So we kind of knew we weren't supposed to do that. And we kind of grew out of it naturally without, this kind of harsh sort of disciplinary approach. And I turned out to be an okay Catholic, even though I misbehaved for those many years. So I do think that is a kind of a mom thing that we tend to bring. Although in my house, that was my husband, because he was actually the worst behaved person in church. So I don't know where that really comes from. But I do think that that's something really important to bring to church, is just a little bit of, not too harshly disciplinarian when we raise our children in the church.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Just as you don't give the homily about church attendance to people who are attending church.
I see a question there.
Yeah, I just had one comment, and then we'll go to Rita's question. Christine, you made me think of our former parish priest, who I think he was in his 70s at this point, and there were a lot of young children, kids under the age of 6, and it could get pretty wild. Noisy, kids running, they'd go up to pray the Our Father at the altar when there'd be a stampede, and it was a little hectic, but the kids would get up there and the priest would say, "Parents, relax. This is the future of the church and we want them here." So I thought that was a good, because of course all the parents were dying 1,000 deaths of their child screeching and running around. Okay, Rita has a very important question here. If we are in a parish where the clergy don't support lay participation, what can we do to change things? It's funny, because one of my questions for the crowd was going to be, what one change in the church would give lay ministry more support? So, Catherine, do you have anything you could say in response? One change that could make a difference.
There's the formal change of going up the food change to the diocese, which is always unpleasant because you're outed as a complainer and you're frozen out in some ways. But I don't understand why pastors don't want the help. They cannot do it all. They simply cannot. So if you have a parish council, and with a pastor like that, you probably don't, but some sort of respectful meeting that says, "Father, we're here to help. We don't want to step on your turf. How can we lend you assistance?" is about the only way to go. Or, as I've known so many people to do here, switch parishes, unfortunately.
Yeah. Christine, did you want to add to that?
I think the church is very big. So if you're in a parish where there's no place for you to use your gifts, first of all, that doesn't exist forever, although it can exist a long time, but it doesn't usually exist forever. But the church is a big place. So, if you want to do a Bible study, and you can do a Bible study, you can invite somebody to help you who knows about the Bible. You don't have to have permission to do that, to get together, have a prayer group. Read Looking to the Laity as a study guide. Or another great book from Novalis is called Pairings, Booze in the Bible. If you want to up your game a little, it's a great discussion book. And there's ways to engage in ministry and that don't necessarily require some kind of approval from on high. So those are, great things that you can do. Yeah.
We have a question or a comment from Deirdre. Deirdre, if you'd like to unmute your microphone.
Thanks for your question, Rita.
Go ahead, Deirdre. Not. Deirdre's unmuted her microphone, but I'm not hearing anything.
I'm not hearing.
So
Okay.
Maybe Deirdre, if you'd like to pose your question or comment in the chat, we'll see that it is heard.
Okay. Well, in the meantime, I'll just ask one more question, and also to everyone listening, please feel free to ask questions or just make comments on your own experience as a lay person, lay minister. So how could we attract more people to lay ministry? I like what Christine was saying about it's a big church. That means there's a lot of different options for things. And some people may feel, I come to church, but I'm not that churchy. I don't want to really get that involved. But what I found is everyone's interested in at least one area. Maybe it's preparing for a refugee family's arrival. People love that because they feel like they're making a difference in someone's life, or it's a soup kitchen, or it's the bazaar, whatever it is. There's always one way to connect. So I think if we can offer people a wide range of options, that's a good way to attract people. And once they're engaged, that can easily lead to deeper engagement.
We have a comment or a question from Elaine Biolo. Maybe okay. Elaine, if you can unmute your microphone. Hi, Elaine, can you unmute your microphone? Oh, there we go.
I would like to suggest that when we think of ministry in the church, it's far wider than liturgical or ecclesial ministry. I think that my experience of young people is they will get involved in anything for the poor, anything for service, but they have no interest in reading a church. It just doesn't appeal to them. They don't, to be in the church structure per se, is not something that they desire to do, but they desire to serve. And I think that we have too narrow a scope and definition of what ministry is in the church.
I really agree with you there, Elaine. Yeah, and that's maybe something that lay people could do, is expand that definition for each other, so that people can connect in a way that works for them.
And Sharon's made the comment that invitation, a personal tap on the arm, is often best for getting people involved. There's a strong need for outreach, and as someone who works in a church, there's often people that want to be engaged with the goings on, but maybe apprehensive or nervous about making that first step. So that invitation, tap on the arm, I would agree is very important.
Definitely. Yeah.
When I ran out of the cold, there were various teams who would come in on some Sundays, and there were the clothing people and the dessert people and the linens people. And some people were very turf conscious and would say, nope, I want 10 people on my team.
Nope, you're muted, Catherine.
Anyone who came and wanted to be involved, we were obliged to find a place to put them, you know, because there you can always share duties, because it's never just about the actual thing that you're doing. If it's true ministry, that's just a starting point. You're building community. You're seeing the face of Christ, not only in the people to whom you're ministering, but the person you don't really like who's saying you can't be part of his team. So I think it should be an open-ended invitation.
Deirdre has apparently fixed her audio, so maybe we'll get her to unmute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
There we go. There's been so many metaphors with the muting. The first, it was just with Anne's question about like one change. And I know everything in this system is huge to change anything, but it just is very apparent. The lecture style of worship is the lowest form of pedagogy. It's a way to translate one way. And I also like rituals. I like the ritual aspect of the ceremony. I love homilies, but I really feel like it's like, why don't people feel like they can be heard? It's like, because anytime we get together, it's our role to be silent. That's our duty, is to be as silent as possible and as part of the system as possible. And we're supposed to be quiet and listen to a man's interpretation every single week of a book. And that's not to say I don't want men's perspective, but I'm told to be silent. And then as you grow up in the church, there's nowhere left if you're a woman. Like the world's saying, oh, I'll let you be a doctor and take care of someone's body. I'll let you take care of someone's mind and be a psychologist. I'd let you be a biologist or a veterinary, like practitioner. But talking about spirituality, oh, sorry, we found the limit of what women can do. Even though as we're speaking about it, it's actively what women do in community anyways. I really feel like as a young person, there's just like literally no place to be. If you're in any way engaged in society, there's no place to be in church. Like it just, I've been actively taught to not be supportive. Like I don't, Catherine, when you were talking about like that nuance that your mom went through of being subservient, like I've been taught not to be that way. So I can't even perform it. So my only option is to not be here.
See, this is why the panel looking at the ordination of female deacons is so important, because if that were to happen and there's precedent in the church, we'd suddenly hear women preach. And imagine how amazing that would be, because we've never heard a woman's take on scripture in our churches.
Just not in Catholic churches.
Yes.
I've heard women preach.
I was speaking specifically about the Catholic Church.
Yeah, I just feel as though we're at a stage in Catholicism, and it's great that people are now looking at like, oh, let's ask people what the lay people need and what is happening. But we're in a completely dwindling organization. We have the weirdest HR issue. We have literally people bursting for a job interview and people saying, but we got no one to do the job. And I kind of feel like we want the life to go. We need to let the people that are feeling like I really want to lead, I really want to contribute, to not have to justify their body parts, the character in their soul, just saying I want to be here, and like everyone, I will not do it right at first and I will learn how to do it better. But I feel like the lecture style allows the repetition of the same to happen, and as Christine was saying, that there's a little bit of like, you can do a Bible study on the side, but that has no audience. That's great. It starts an audience and it starts a fire on the side. But like, I don't know. I don't feel where 2 or 3 are gathered when I go to churches. I feel me and God, that's it. And that's great. And I love that. But I don't feel like I'm gathering with people. And I feel like that's pretty important for us to like connect with each other. And this lecture style doesn't allow it if it's the only style we congregate in. That's my thing.
Thanks, Deirdre. We are all nodding.
Deirdre,
Christine, do you have any comments that you wanted to make, or?
I think Elaine's got her hand up again too.
Okay. Yeah, I do. Okay. I understand perfectly what Deirdre's saying. And in terms of the diaconate for women, I think that is a compromise. The diaconate for women, diaconate is by its very nature service. It's not leadership. It's not preaching, unless you're a deacon for the priesthood, right? So yes, it would open opportunities, but it still excludes women from decision-making bodies in the church. And I think it's got a whole thing to do with the power issue. It's all power. But I do think that the diaconate, as well as it may help us, I also think it's a compromise against going for priesthood.
Yeah, I mean, or you could say it's a stepping stone, because to be a priest, you need to be a deacon first.
But that's a different kind of deacon. That's a different diaconate than what they would propose for women. They would propose a diaconate of service, not a diaconate as a step to the priesthood.
Not yet.
With the permanent diaconate, you can preach and you can witness weddings. And just think of how wonderful it would be sometimes to have a woman celebrant at a wedding. It's lovely. It's a recognition of the gifts we bring.
It's funny, I'm thinking about my mom, who was very traditional Catholic, and she went to a friend's funeral. It's probably in the 1990s. And she came home. She was so excited. She said, it was a United Church funeral. And she said, that was the best homily I've ever heard. It was so, at a funeral, she said, it was so compassionate. It was all about the person and their relationship with God. And she went on and on and on. And I thought I would never hear the day where she would say something like that. So yeah, so I do look forward to hearing women preaching at Catholic churches, that's for sure. Kathy, you have your hand up.
I just wanted to respond in part to Deirdre's comments, and also to pick up on the question that you posed at the beginning about one change. The reality is, I think that we are in a very big struggle that has been going on for a long time. And as a young person, in the 70s, I mean, we're all nostalgic for that time, because, you know, we had people telling us as women, you can go study theology now. You can, you know, my chaplain at university in 1976 said, Kathy, you could go to the States and train. And I went to Fordham and I did a degree in campus ministry, and I worked as a campus minister, and then I came back to Canada. And it seemed like things were just going to keep opening up and opening up and opening up. But as most of us who lived through that time know, that by the late 1980s and the early 1990s, the climate for women had changed considerably. And it became increasingly hostile and increasingly inhospitable, to the point where I left active ministry in the early 90s and went to work in the secular world, because that was where I felt I could actually use my gifts and have them appreciated. So having come back at this stage in my life to being actively engaged again in questions around the church, I've always gone to church and sung in the choir and done all those things, but I've stayed away from the organizational questions, mostly because I was busy with my life and didn't have time, but also because I still have ambivalence about trying to bring change into the church. And I guess part of where I've come to, if you want to read about women in Christianity, get Mary Malone's 3-volume Women in Christianity series and read about it from the very early days until now. And you'll see that over the centuries, there was a concerted effort to shut women down. And women's religious communities and religious orders were a way that women saved their sanity. I'm convinced that that's how women managed to pursue their ministry, pursue their studies, pursue an independent life, and in a way that got, they worked out a deal with the church where the church kind of blessed them, but there were, limits to what they could do, etc. It's always been a compromise. It's always been a struggle. And at my age, now in my mid 60s with a 40-year-old daughter and twin granddaughters who are 11, I know that it's not going to be in my lifetime that I'm going to see the change. And I don't have the need, or I don't feel, I feel like I was at a webinar recently with a group from the UK, Root and Branch, and it was an Australian guy speaking. And he said, inertia is the bishop's best friend. So, or the church's best friend, that in a sense, if we don't keep talking, if we don't keep showing up, then that kind of capitulates. So I think of it at my age that I'm doing this for Deirdre, I'm doing it for my daughter, Rebecca, I'm doing it for my granddaughters, Anne Louise and Sophia, because my daughter was an altar server, and she was the first altar server in our parish in 1988 or whenever she did that. And that was not open, as Anne Louise said, or whoever said before. So I think that seeing this as a long-term project and understanding that, as St. Paul says, we plant the seed and Apollo waters it, but God makes it grow. We don't get to see the end result now, but we do it because we believe the kernel of truth in this gospel. And it has been appropriated. It has been taken from at least half of us, but I would say it's been taken from laymen too. And it's been 1,000 years since it got appropriated. And I see this opportunity with synodality and Pope Francis and all these ways that he's trying to gradually and tentatively introduce changes without creating a schism. Really, that's what he's trying to avoid, schism right now, because we do have people who think that it should stay the way it was. So I just want to support his efforts. I want to support other people in those efforts. And wherever we can create a space for women to preach. Deirdre, I used to write for Novalis in the 80s. I used to write for the homiletic service, and I've had the experience of going to Mass and listening to a priest deliver my homily. I've actually had that experience because there were lay women writing for homiletic service. We wrote for it. So it's a bit like Alice in Wonderland sometimes, a bit bizarre. But so just to say, is you have to take the long view. We do in the moment. I was glad you started by saying you wanted to just deal with the now, with the panel. And I think that's what we always have to do, is stay very present. What is happening right now? Jesus said, read the signs of the times. The signs of the times right now is the church does have an HR issue, Deirdre. Our churches are in big trouble because we don't have priests. And they don't know how to lead collaboratively. They don't know how to bring lay people in because they weren't trained to do that. And so we need to be there, present, and wherever there's a crack, we've got to insert ourselves. And it's the plant that inserts itself in the crack in the wall that brings it down. It's not beating the wall like this that brings it down. It's the plant that grows in the cracks. So I don't know if there's if you see a future, Deirdre, but I hope that we have more young women like you who hang in. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Kathy. It's really important what you're saying there, and I know we all share that sense of just great frustration that we are where we're at right now. And Yeah, I totally agree. Catherine.
I like the fact that Francis is taking this two-pronged approach where he is finally saying, yes, let's formally recognize what women have been doing for decades in the church. And let's appoint women to key positions to hear women's voices. But at the same time, he's doing things like restoring the reputation of Mary Magdalene and giving her a proper feast day and pulling her back from the story embroidered out of whole cloth that she was a bad woman. She was a visionary. She was Apostola Apostolorum. She was the woman who delivered the news of the resurrection to the world. And we're all called to be like Mary Magdalene. So let's keep the cleanup going, restore women to places that they deserve in the church.
And just for the young, especially the younger people who feel so discouraged, people often say to me, I can't believe you're still going to church. You're still part of that. It's ridiculous. And I say, well, you can work from within, or you can not, or you can try and work from without. But for me, working from within is what suits me. And sometimes, if the big picture of the church is too much, I have to keep taking it down a notch. So maybe it's my diocese, or maybe it's my parish, or maybe it's a group of 5 people in my parish who speak my language, and I can really speak to them about this and my frustrations and my anger or my loss of hope. And that's where I find the strength. So that's something that helps me, especially when I'm feeling like this is just not working at all, because I still want to be there. So I have to find ways to get the support I need to keep going. Christine.
I just want to say where my hope comes from. So to be honest with you, I have had magnificent experiences of church. So I'm a little emotional about this too, because I see Sister Pauline, who was my elementary school religion teacher and also my cousin. But you had an amazing effect on me, and it's generational, right? I'm soon gonna be a grandmother, and so sometimes you don't see the fruits of the work that you do. But I loved religion class. I still remember Sister Pauline coming in and talking to us about the gospel stories and playing Joe Wise songs, which are kind of passé now, but still, and I look at my aunt is also here, who always used to talk about religion with me. I see some lay people that worked collaboratively with me. We had an amazing team of men and women working together really, really joyfully, building fantastic programs that were not, I think sometimes when we talk about, even the image of kind of cracking the walls, we do need to do that, but it's really to build up the church. And there's people that feel like that cracking the walls is not, is about destroying the church. It's not. It's about picking off the scab so you can put the peroxide in where it needs healing. And I've had amazing experiences of worship where I felt, really connected to God and all the people around me. So with all that is actually my primary experience of church. It's been positive, it's been joyful, it's been life affirming. And so even though I have also had fairly horrendous experiences of church, and I mean really horrendous, that to me feels like not church. That's an aberration. So I can kind of still see Jesus through all that, because all those people from my earliest age helped me see Jesus through all the mess. And Jesus lived in the mess. Look at his disciples. Like, they were just a disaster.
A rock.
So it's okay for me to work with other people who are also kind of a disaster. I'm probably a disaster in my own way. you know, one of the best experiences I had was when I was writing the book for RCIA, and I was talking about if you're gonna try to keep your faith, you have to recognize that everybody's going to let you down but God. And I told a story about a person in the parish who, you know, left a ministry that I was leading. And I thought, oh yeah, they're that guy in the ministry that they have conflict and he's really made her go now. So, you know, I asked her if she was okay. She said, no, I'm fine. I'm just busy. And I knew that wasn't the truth. So about 6 months later, I was actually at the Sacrament of Reconciliation and she was there. And I went up and I said, are you okay? Because I feel like you didn't really leave because you were busy. I feel like you left because something was bothering you. She said, yes, you're right. And I said, was it so-and-so? And she goes, actually, no, it was you. Oh, you mean I can fail the people of God too with all my good intentions? But it was great for me because it helped me realize that we're just all kind of broken people trying to help in this project of the reign of God. And that helps me feel hopeful, you know, that I really messed up and was completely and utterly oblivious to it. So I don't know, that's how I approach my hopefulness in the church.
I saw a hand go up from Diane. Diane, did you want to make a comment or?
Thanks for all the comments in the chat as well, everyone.
No, sorry, it was a mistake.
Oh, okay. All right.
Sorry.
Catherine, did you have your hand up?
I did have my hand up because somebody touched on the term domestic church. And I'm a firm believer in parents as first educators. We understand that's the way it's supposed to be. And so my husband was not a Catholic. Primary religious education felt to me, although he was a team player, if I was out of the house and he needed an answer to help the kids with their homework, he'd call my mom. It was great. He was very supportive. But I always felt with the children, what they needed was, here's the way the church is today. I wasn't going to impose my viewpoint, my lens on them. We could talk a lot about what ifs and in the future. And at the end of the day, I'm my mother's daughter. I'm a rule follower. And then JP2 died. And we had on CNN and we were watching the consistory, my daughters and I, and the older one, who must then have been maybe 12, turned to the younger and said, well, where are all the women? And Charlotte said, I don't know. I was wondering that too. And I said, oh no, guys, this is a men only vote. And they said, well, that's not right. That was just their understanding. And that was without me having imposed any kind of interpretation on it. So to a certain degree, generational change is just organic. And the outside world, you know, you want to talk about ultramontanism, the outside world is still going to get to the next generation and make them that much bolder to try to figure out ways to affect change in the church.
Agreed. Yes, our hope is in them. Any other comments from those listening today? Or any questions for Catherine or Christine?
There is still the question of power. I can't let this end without acknowledging that.
Definitely.
Domestic churches are fine. Everybody's broken, true, Christine. But the reality is some of those broken people have immeasurable power over the rest of us. And they have built walls that have to come down. That's not the church. The walls that have to come down are the walls that are keeping the church from breaking into the world. So I would say maybe that's for another time, but there are definitely some analyses that we've learned from feminism, that we've learned from third world peoples, that we've learned from racialized peoples and indigenous peoples of how power operates. And how in some ways, and this is my ambivalence and my dilemma every day that I get up and do something in this church, is that I allow them to continue by doing the work on the side. And I worry about that. I'm not at peace with it. I may never be, but I pray. And I know that when I come together with people like you and I hear other people voicing the same vision of church. I believe the Spirit is in that, and that's what keeps me. But every time I leave a meeting where a priest shuts somebody down or refuses to listen and just use his power because he has it and we don't, I leave saying, why am I doing this? So it's a daily struggle for sure to stay in. I just wanted to put that on the table about the power issue.
Thanks, Kathy.
Yeah.
Michael has his hand up.
Just one of the things that is striking me as I'm listening is that when we talk about power, as Kathy said, so the abuse of that power, we talk about women are bringing, I've heard like women, because we're mothers, or you know what I mean, women are mothers and we have family, that we know how to interact in the parish, etc. But also I consider myself a caregiver and someone who deeply loves a woman who works in the church. And the pain of seeing how she has been treated by the abuses of power she struggles with every day, that pain as a caregiver is very deep. And it radiates through the families, like my children, because of things they've witnessed or heard, are also not wanting to participate anymore, and they were raised in the faith. And so I just wanted to say that for those of us, whether we're men or women, who have intimate partners that we are very committed to, and sometimes as a man, I would sometimes want to take over and tell someone to go where I wanted them to go, but I had to let it be Christine's work. But I just wanted to offer that the pain of this is not just something that women are experiencing, but those of us who are deeply committed to the women in our lives also experience, and their children as well.
Yeah, that's so important, Michael. Thank you. I feel like we just need to all take a breath after hearing Kathy and Michael speak. You know, it's so massive, and we can feel so small in this whole thing, but yeah, I don't have any answers.
And clericalism.
And clericalism.
As if that could happen tomorrow. But there are fewer priests. There are better educated Catholics in the pew. Culturally, we've come to a point where we can express opinions to priests that they may not like because they're challenging. And seminaries have to have priests thinking about different ways to engage with people. And Catholic institutions can be terrible employers, just terrible, ironically enough.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you everyone for your comments and your questions and your sharing deeply. I think it's just essential that we keep doing that with each other. Yeah.
If we have no further questions, Anne Louise, do you have any final comments you'd like to make?
No, I'm done.
Okay, well, at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Gary Werner.
Yeah, thank you very much, Keith. And this has been a very engaging presentation. It launched by Anne Louise, and as I thank you for really, and I will pick up on the theme of hope from the very many comments and in the various presentations and responses. The theme of hope is one that really, I think, runs through today's event. And we thank you for having begun by reminding us about the Second Vatican Council, which really, for many of us, at least people even from my generation, is really what we are hoping to see take life. the Second Vatican Council, which offered us the idea of the apostolate of the lay people, of the priesthood of the faithful. And thank you for reminding us that the moment is ripe for lay leadership. And we remind, of course, everyone to read the book, Looking to the Laity, Reflections Where the Church Can Go From Here, for more detailed examples of where we can go. Christine, I think, was very, I appreciated the way in which you talked about your personal experience of women and women's ministry in the church, the witness of women's religious, the witness of lay ecclesial ministers, the witness of women in the pews, represented perhaps among others by the Catholic Women's League, dedicated women who hold the church together in so many parishes, in so many ways. And I appreciated the way in which you sort of talked about women's participation and contribution, but not in an essentialist gender interpretation, but based more on concrete experience of women bringing a different, as you put it, a different constellation of gifts, and reminding us of how the church is impoverished when it doesn't cherish and make use of these gifts. And Catherine, I was moved by your beginning with your mother's witness, which for me, in terms of my own formation, I know my mother played is who I am today. So I think that was very good of you, the way you showed how you carried this through in your own life. And the examples and the stories you told, again, very much based on the experience, on the concrete experience of women and the relationship, the relational skills, and the reminder that the pastor cannot do everything and shouldn't do everything. And the reminder was of our current realities of the shortage of priests, of the inability of so many in these priestly leader roles to lead in a collaborative way. But again, the emphasis on women, as drawing on your own experience and on the gifts that flow from that experience. In the discussion, general discussion, there was very interesting ideas shared on what is ministry for lay people, how best to foster true engagement of lay people in the church. An interesting discussion of the diaconate for women. Is this a step forward? And the idea of women preaching in the church. Or is it really a compromise? I think it's interesting discussion. I think we recognize the barriers, that there are structures that are blockages to women and to lay collaboration generally in ministry. There is abuse of power, abuse that's manifested in so many different ways. But I would end in thanking you all, but I would end again on the note of hope that Anne Louise began with, which speaking about reminding us of what the German bishops are doing on their synodal path, or the invitation by the French bishops to 100 lay people to the General Assembly, or to more recently Pope Francis and the changes that are being brought in at the Vatican, where any baptized Catholic can now take up positions. So interesting too in terms of Pope Francis. I picked up on this the way in which the rehabilitation, if you like, of women figures. For example, Mary Magdalene, I thought was an interesting idea. So the final word in thanking you is to borrow from another context, a luta continua. This is an ongoing struggle. It's a long-term struggle, but there are signs of hope, and we will change these structures, and we look forward to that day. Thank you very much.